You're listening to the Love Unplugged podcast, episode 151. Do you find manifestation and spirituality a little bit woo-woo? You're not alone. Often this is because you don't have a full understanding of it and it doesn't make sense to you. So today I thought we would take a moment to learn more about practices and tools that can help us feel more aligned energetically and how that can actually help you in business and life. So without further ado, let's jump right in. Hey there, I'm your host, Jessica Fergon, and I am passionate about doing the inner work needed to reach your goals. Let me be your guide as we navigate all the fears and insecurities that surface when it's time to step outside of your comfort zone. Along with my knowledgeable guests and industry experts, I'm here to teach you how to reawaken your life purpose and passion and create the steps to turn your intentions into action. Ultimately, my goal is to empower you to rise above those blocks holding you back and start living a life that you are worthy and deserving of. So come on, it's time to slow down, find a comfy spot with your favorite organic tea, and get inspired. Thank you for tuning in to the Love Unplugged podcast. Hello, loves. Today I am joined by the lovely Andi Eaton. Andi is the founder of WeWe and WeWe Studio, a platform and digital wellness studio dedicated to the modern mystic interested in new school approaches to wellness. She's a soul strategist working with companies like Google, Pinterest, and Aveda, as well as conscious brands and CEOs interested in fusing soul and spirit into creativity and work. She's the host of the charted podcast, Your Woo-Woo Best Friend, which features practical conversations for a magical, radiant lifestyle. Andi's method incorporates yogic technology, the psychology of manifestation, cosmic alignment, and the science of human energy. Andi spent over a decade in the beauty industry before launching her company, which we will get into, and is expanding into the clean beauty product space later this year with a Skinimalism capsule collection. Through WeWe, Andi offers online courses, a membership program, and workshops, and is presently writing book number 3 with Chronicle Books. So this is a long list of accomplishments and such incredible work that you do. So I'm so incredibly honored to have you as my guest, Andi. Welcome. But before we start and we dive into your experience and your expertise, for those that don't know you yet, I would love for you to take a moment to introduce yourself, talk about you personally, what's going on in your world.
Sure. Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for such a kind introduction. Anytime you get to hear people talk about you, it's such a reminder and an affirmation that's like, yes, I'm doing it. I'm doing it. This is great. Because, for all of us, it doesn't matter who you are. It feels sometimes like, is the work I'm doing, does it matter? And so thank you so much for sharing all of that. A little bit about me. I am based in Los Angeles. I'm fairly new here, actually. I moved here about a year and a half ago. Previously, I was in Nashville, Tennessee, and then my home, very much my soul home, is New Orleans, and I spent well over a decade living there. I feel like I really grew up living in that city. And I'm getting ready to get married, which is really exciting, and it's taking up a lot of space in my world. So those are some of the things going on in my life. And of course, you talked about the work that I do, and I just really I love having a good time. I love having fun. I love being in nature. I love getting out to explore art and music and all that good stuff, and just live life.
I love that. Well, congratulations on your upcoming wedding.
Thank you.
I used to be a wedding planner, so I know the amount of hours it takes to plan a wedding, and it's a lot.
It is. And I've learned, so we didn't hire a wedding planner because you would think that like I already knew this stuff, but you have to like be in it to really get it. We're having a small wedding, but even when you have a small wedding, you still have to do all the same steps to have the wedding that you would be doing if you had 100 people or 200 people coming. So we're just working through it, and we're finding that, okay, good. It's good to see Ben and I, my fiance, are still in love despite the craziness of planning a wedding. So thank you.
Oh, that's amazing. New Orleans, to Nashville to then LA. Like those are very different cities.
Yeah, they really, really are. It's so true. They're so different. Yeah, I moved to New Orleans when, let's see, it was a couple of years after Hurricane Katrina. I was working in the beauty industry then, and the company I was working for, it was a distribution company for the brand Aveda, and their headquarters is right outside of that city. I moved there to work on a project that was focused on helping with some of the infrastructure and rebuilding after Hurricane Katrina. The company owned 17 salons and spas, and I was working as the general manager of those 17 salons and spas, and many of them were,
Wow.
yeah, and they were based around that area. A lot of them were, several of them were in New Orleans. They ran from like Dallas, Texas to Baton Rouge to New Orleans to Asheville, North Carolina, kind of all around the South. And so I moved there then, and I had been traveling there quite a bit before making that move. And I just really felt called to go and be a part of the regeneration of that city after such a tragic experience. And I loved it so much. I still love it so much. Actually, both my little sister, and my little brother live there now. I attracted them to come and live there after I moved there. And Ben, my fiance, his family, he grew up there. His family, much of his family is still there. So we're back there all the time. It's a really special place. It's so creative. It's like the most European city, and all of the US, and there's just like a really great cafe culture, and the food is amazing, the music's amazing. And then after that, I moved to Nashville because Ben and I were dating. He's a musician. He was based in Nashville when we met, and I was based in New Orleans. We dated long distance for a couple of years. He was on tour most of the time. So the long distance thing worked for a couple of years because I was traveling a lot, he was traveling a lot, and we would do everything we could to be in the same places as often as possible. But he bought a house there in 2017. And so we finally decided that it made sense for us to stop the long distance thing. And I moved there in 2017. And then we spent the next couple of years there, and then came here after the experience of 2020. We really realized that we didn't want him to be on the road quite as much, be doing as much touring. And the way to do that would be to move to LA and be in the studio environment for him a bit more. And I can really work anywhere. So got to experience all the magic in both of those two places, New Orleans and Nashville. And now we're absolutely loving it here in LA.
Mm, I love that. Yeah, I definitely want to go to Nashville, and New Orleans is definitely on that list as
Yeah, you
well.
got to go. They're
Yeah,
great cities, both of them.
absolutely. All right, so let's dive into your experience. So we know that you're a part of the beauty industry. So what exactly did that look like? What was your career like before coming up with the idea for your current business?
Yeah, sure. So I started working in the beauty industry really right out of college. I actually it's no surprise I am marrying a musician because my very first job out of college was in music. I've always loved the music industry, and honestly I've always kind of loved musicians. I'm like very enamored by that sort of creativity, and I worked in that space for about a year right out of college. But then pretty quickly there was other interests that I had. Fashion and beauty were some of those other interests, and I found my way into the beauty industry about a year after college, and I started working with the brand Aveda then, and sales specifically. I was working with salons and spas that carried the product. And I worked my way up in that company pretty quickly. I was really, it was like hustle culture era back then. And
Mm,
I was doing everything I could to work my way up in the company. I really loved the company. I loved the people. I loved the ethos of the brand. And I was really interested in Ayurvedic beauty specifically, which is the foundation of that brand. So I stayed there for a really long time, and I learned all sorts of ins and outs of a company like that, from distribution and operations, education. I worked with the Aveda Institutes, which there are many all around the country, working in retail and salons and spas. So I just got a really good education around the whole of the industry. And I stayed on that path for, yeah, over a decade.
Wow, that's a long time. So, how did the idea for something completely different come to be?
So I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do next. While I was working in that industry, working with that company, I had started in New Orleans a fashion incubator program for young designers, many of which were students, some of which are like really famous names now. I'd started this program for basically these designers that were living and working in New Orleans who I saw really great potential and to help them to get their designs to market. And it was very much a passion project. So I was working for Aveda, like that was my day job, and then moonlighting running this fashion incubator, which I was making no money doing, but I loved doing it. And it was something that I was getting this opportunity to also work in the world of fashion in some capacity. And one of the things that I learned that I had a really great skill set around in my time working with Aveda was the ability to help creatives see a project through and make money with that project. So, whether it was hairdressers or makeup artists or estheticians or fashion designers, helping them to take their big vision and craft it in a way that would elevate them to the next level of their professional experience. And so I was doing that and running that incubator for quite a few years. And then I just started to have this awareness that there was more to me, there was more for me, and I didn't know what it was. If it could have been the incubator all the time, full time, and I could have actually made a living doing it, I probably would have gone that route. And looking back, there were ways that that could have happened, but those weren't really ways that I was exploring at that time. So I went to the CEO of the company I was working for at that time and said I was going to give it a year and then I was going to leave. And I did not know what that was going to look like, but I was going to just allow myself the time and space to figure out what was next for me. And I knew she would be very willing to work with me on that plan for a year's a year's departure. So, a lot of people are like, I gave 2 weeks or I gave a month. I literally gave a year's notice, but I had been there for so long. I wanted to set the company up for success. And I wanted to be really transparent about what I was feeling. And I knew it wasn't going to be this type of thing where it was like, oh, if you're going to leave in a year, you need to go now. I knew that that was not going to be the vibe. And so I spent that year really saving money and preparing to not have a plan for a little while. I had never in my life not had a plan. And even just planning to not have a plan was really scary for me, but I was open to that. And I knew that that was going to be the way to figure out what was next for me. And so when that year came up, I closed the incubator, I left my job, and I actually moved to Spain for about 6 months. And trust me, I was like very much on a budget. So this was not like a glamorous move, but I felt like I needed to give myself a lot of space and put myself in an environment that was quite outside of my comfort zone in order to start to figure out what would be next for me.
Hmm, that's that's pretty such an interesting experience because, like you said, usually when you give your notice and you're giving them like advance notice that you're going to be departing, they'll usually tell you to leave pretty
Yeah.
quick,
Yeah, totally.
which is such a great experience you had that you had that 1 year period to plan, right? To set you up to be able to take that leap. How did you feel about leaving an industry like a career with a company that you've had for 10 years and jumping into that unknown? Like, how did you prep yourself to be able to do that? Because taking that leap can be very scary.
It was so scary. And what I found to be pretty wild looking back was I was really good at my job. I could run the financials, I could balance the P&L, I could make game plans on how we were going to increase sales for a specific launch. I could do all the things around client activations or consumer facing events. And then all of a sudden, I had to think about what I was going to do and what my business was going to be. And I was quite paralyzed. I was like, I don't know what this is going to look like. I don't know how I'm going to run it. I didn't initially set up the financial plan the right way. Like, I learned so much about being an entrepreneur and how quite different it is from even being a senior level executive for a company in which there was a lot of structure and foundations that were already in place when I joined that company that I learned and I found my way into. And then having to then set that up for myself was way more challenging than I expected it was going to be. And it probably took years to really get that right, but I was in it and I was game to learn the process. I made lots of mistakes at the beginning. I gave myself a mantra which a mentor had given to me earlier in my career, which is fail fast forward, which is basically get comfortable failing, do it fast, and then move forward. And so I said that to myself almost every day, fail fast forward, fail fast forward. And that gave me the courage to try things out that sometimes worked and sometimes didn't work. At the beginning, I was doing all sorts of different things. I opened a little vintage boutique, and I in that boutique I carried some of the designers that I had worked with in the incubator. I did that for a year, and at the same time I was doing some styling work and creative direction work and consulting. Social media was just starting to become a thing, so I was doing a little bit of consulting around marketing, and social media slowly started to become a part of that. So I was doing this these variety of things, and really looking at, okay, which of these things do I really enjoy doing? What is working for me? And at the same time, I had started my blog. I had started the blog before I had even gone to Spain. I had started it while I was running the incubator. And slowly the blog was starting to grow. And I found in the process pretty early that if I started treating the blog like a business, there was some opportunity there in the digital space to have some sort of income coming in from the blog too. So it was like there was no rhyme or reason to what I was doing at the beginning. I did not sit down at the beginning and have a business plan and say, okay, here's what I'm going to launch. I'm going to hang the sign out on the door. Here's what it's going to be. I just experimented and experimented until I found my way into what really made sense for me.
I love that. What was your experience starting and so growing your business? So you've come to a place where you've learned a lot and you've kind of got some foundations in place and you've got a blog and whatnot and you're looking to monetize it. Now, what was your experience turning that into what it is today?
So I started to notice that the blog was growing, that there was money coming in through the blog. I was also doing some brand work with social media and like the early days of that even being a thing and just kind of figuring out what that would look like. And I closed the boutique. I realized that that wasn't really a thing that was going to work for me. I really wanted to travel more than I expected I was going to be traveling. And I learned pretty quickly you can't run a very small shop, and also be on a plane every couple of weeks. There was just like that wasn't going to work for
No.
me. So I started looking at, okay, where can I put my focus? And I hired a digital strategist, and that was the big first investment in my business. And not that she was even that expensive, but I looked at what was possible and knew that there was great opportunity to grow the monetization in the blog. And I found that I had a pretty good perspective of what was working from an SEO standpoint. I realized I wasn't going to compete with the Condé Nast and the Lonely Planets of the world. I had been doing a lot of travel writing. I realized that's not going to be it for me. But what is going to be interesting and what I have an opportunity to really have a voice in is this more mystical approach to wellness. And so I made a pretty hard pivot into focusing on that as the leading driving conversation on the blog, brought in a digital strategist. And that year that I brought her in, we, over the course of probably 3 to 6 months, had 10 times our traffic, our readership on the blog. And so a lot of the things I had been doing to make extra money to just get the business off the ground, like the creative direction work and styling work, I was able to start letting that go as we focused on the blog. And then over time, we looked at other opportunities like adding courses, adding retreats, other ways that we could monetize our readership. And that was when I really got clear on the foundation of the business. And then what I noticed was I missed doing some of that work in the beauty space, and I wanted to do some consulting and still have some fun in that beauty space and the wellness space. And so we were working on growing the blog and then made services available for consulting specifically with conscious brands and entrepreneurs who were very aligned to the type of conversations we were having on the blog. So that became really the next level of the business, and the revenue opportunity on the business was adding in the consulting services.
Wow. I love how that just naturally unfolded. Now, digital strategist, what did this person help you with? Like, what exactly changed when they stepped into your business?
So when she's actually now my director of marketing and operations, but when she started working with me back then, she we looked at some low-hanging fruit. So there were things like, back in those days, Pinterest was an incredible driver of blog traffic, and yet a lot of folks weren't really considering it. Everybody was like putting all their focus on Instagram, and we looked at stats and we could see, okay, like I have a nice size Instagram following, but it doesn't convert to readers on the blog. However, my tiny Pinterest following doesn't matter because Pinterest is like a search engine. And when people are looking for information on Pinterest and they come across your post, it doesn't matter if they're following you or not, it gets traffic to your blog. So that was like one of the first things and one of the fastest things that made an impact was getting a Pinterest strategy. So that was one thing. And then she also spent quite a bit of time getting really strategic on the SEO of the site. So just reworking old posts. There were so many old posts that were just me journaling mostly. That's what the blog started as. So there were posts that were like me traveling around Spain when I had lived there, talking about experiences I had had and places I had visited, but they weren't really set up for SEO type traffic. So she did a lot of reworking on old posts. It's also one of the things I always recommend to anyone who asks about growing a blog. It's like, get your Pinterest game strong, get your SEO plan down, and go rework old content to make it relevant and interesting and searchable for today's reader. And that's a really good first start.
That's really great advice. I love that. Pinterest is definitely underused.
Yeah.
It's a great platform. Yeah. Now, I want to dive into your expertise. So, a lot of people struggle creating a spiritual practice because they find it to be a little bit woo woo. They don't really understand it. It doesn't seem like factual, you know what I mean? Like it just doesn't seem like there's a lot behind it. So, what are your thoughts and recommendations on them, getting out of that thought pattern and exploring what this could look like for them?
Yeah, I love that, and I always love this question when it comes up because I too was a bit skeptical when I was, in the beginning stages of finding my own sense of spirituality and my own practice. As a kid, I was like very woo, but like we all do, we kind of suppress the things that were really special about us as children as we start to turn into adults. And so like looking back now, I'm like, oh yeah, I was a really witchy kid. I was like, in the woods, like divining over rocks and like, talking to the water gods. But I didn't know what that was when I was a kid. It just was like this was what I was doing. So as I was coming out of the corporate space, when I made that move to Spain, something happened for me that was kind of this like very in my face moment. I moved to the city in Spain where I was living, and I didn't know anything about it before I moved there. I was living in a friend's family home, and literally within, I don't know, less than a 10-minute walk to my house was the largest Buddhist stupa in the West. The Buddhist stupas are like the temples. It was called the Stupa of Enlightenment. And it was right there. And meditation practice happened multiple times a day, and it was free. And there was talks and things going on all the time. And I was very much like, well, this is clearly a sign that I need to be meditating. I need to be going to the temple and meditating. So I started doing that. And then I started really studying a bit more about mystical modalities. So I loved psychology. That was always something I was really interested in. And I loved the idea of the shadow work from Carl Jung. And then I noticed as I studied more about Carl Jung that he was an ardent believer of the mystical. He studied Taoism and Hinduism and Buddhism and so many other traditions. He used tarot cards and astrology and even yoga in his psychotherapy sessions with patients. And he believed that those modalities were incredibly important to understanding the human mind. And then I looked at other scientists like Albert Einstein. There's a quote from Einstein, and he says something to the effect of, everything is determined by forces over which we have no control. And that's quite a mystical way of thinking for a scientist. Then I looked at some of the financial icons of our time, and there were people like JP Morgan of Morgan Chase Banks and Seymour Cromwell and Jacob Stout. These people were all presidents of the New York Stock Exchange, and they each were very interested and often consulted astrological advice in planning their business moves. So for me, I was like, hey, if these folks had success in this, and these are some pretty smart people, hey, I who am I to say that I'm not going to give it a try? I noticed as I read further, Lady Diana and of course Beyonce. These are people that are also really interested in the mystical, and those are women that I think are pretty badass. So anytime someone asks me about those types of modalities now, and if someone asks me like why should I believe in astrology, I usually just don't answer that question. I'm like, hey, why you should believe in it is if you feel like it's going to give you some sort of support in your life. That's it. I'm not going to explain astrology to you. I want you to find your own way into the practice. But when it comes to things like mindset work or just taking good care through a morning ritual or routine, there is so much good science around why those things are great for you now that I feel like it's really hard to not believe that some sort of supportive connection to spiritual self, whatever that means for you, would be good for you.
Absolutely. Now, we all know entrepreneurs can be very, very busy. A lot of us are type A's. So, what are some practical manifestation strategies that we can use to support stepping into alignment and crystallizing vision?
Yeah, I love this question too. I am very much a busy entrepreneur too, very type A also. And while I am the woo woo best friend, I'm still running a business. And it's important to me that I'm, really committed and connected to what I'm doing in my business. I'm also a Capricorn rising. For those that know what that means, it's kind of the CEO of the astrological world. So I've got a lot of that energy. So for me, the manifestation practices that are really great for type A people, people that are really busy, when you think about what manifestation really is, it's about marrying your feelings, your emotions, your wants, and your desires, and your actions. And so when you can bring all of that together, you can become a master manifester really quickly. So, one of the things that I like to recommend is once a month, whatever that time of month is for you, whether it's the first day of the month, or you want to do it on the full moon, or you want to do it on the new moon, or just pick a day, sit down and map out what it is that you are calling into your life at this moment and gets really specific. So if it's that you're calling in a new house, what is that new house going to look and feel like? What are the aromas surrounding that house? What does it sound like? And then also, how does it feel to be in that new house? What is the energy that you're going to experience? I have an episode on my podcast about manifesting my house in Los Angeles, and it goes through the 8-step process of calling something in like that. And if you don't have time to work through the 8 steps, which I suggest that you do because it is really helpful, those marrying of emotions, feelings, actions, and vision, if you can do those, if you can bring those 4 things together, you are going to be able to manifest quickly. And I find that mapping it out, especially for someone who's quite type A, getting it on paper once a month is a great way to start that process.
Okay. Now, for those, as an entrepreneur, you know that there's crazy highs, there's crazy lows, like the ultimate lows in business. So, for those that experience or are in those lows, it can be hard to be able to stay diligent with your manifestation practice, your visualization practice, and whatnot. How do you recommend, being more disciplined with that?
Yeah, I mean, we're all human, right? So we all go through highs and lows. We all have high vibrational frequency days in which we're feeling love and compassion and happiness and joy. And then we have low vibrational frequency days, which is the feelings of, frustration or anger or overwhelm. It's so normal. And for me, there's that the idea of being in the light all the time is just not reality. We can't live in the light all the time. We have to experience a bit of the shadow, a bit of darkness too, because that's just what makes us human. So if you find that that's what's going on for you, look and see what types of practices help you to shift out of that more frequently. And sometimes people assume when I say something like, see what practices work for you to shift out of that it has to be meditation or it has to be journaling or it has to be yoga or breath work. And those things are all great. And if you have those types of practices, by all means, do those practices. But maybe for you, it's like just blasting your favorite pop songs in the kitchen at night while you're making dinner and like just letting it go, like dancing it out while you're cooking dinner. And that is as meditative and joy inspiring as sitting down and doing a great journaling practice or a meditation practice. Watching inspiring documentaries, like rather than sitting down and turning on The Bachelor, which we all, sometimes need to do that sort of thing, like see if you can find something about an entrepreneur like you or someone you aspire to be and watch a documentary or pick up a book. Those types of things can help to shift you out of that lower frequency feeling just as beautifully as the more quote unquote spiritual practices. As long as you're feeling like whatever it is you're doing is lifting you up, by all means do that. Like one of my favorite practices to do, and I do this every afternoon that I can, is to take off my shoes, walk out into my backyard, make myself a matcha, and just stand outside in the sunshine for about 5 minutes. And I'm not sitting down and meditating. I'm still thinking about all the things I've got going on, but I'm connecting to nature. I'm getting a little bit of that sunlight in my eyes and I'm having a matcha, which I love. And so I feel great after I do that. And if I've had a crazy work day and I take that 5 minutes for myself, it's a complete reset. So whatever works for you, that's what I want you to find and get into a flow of incorporating that more frequently.
That's great advice. Now, you mentioned a little bit about the moon, and I've heard this many times. And I personally don't know quite a lot about it. So, if you could shed a little bit light of how the moon affects us and how we can use the moon to superpower our manifestation practice.
Oh, yeah, of course. I actually used to teach a class on lunar living. I was teaching it all through 2020 and 2021. There's so much cool stuff that you can learn about yourself and your daily life when you sync up to the cycles of the moon. This is one of those things when someone's like, does the moon really affect us? Remember that the moon changes the tides. If the moon can affect the ocean, which is much larger than our little bodies here on this planet, it has definitely got an effect on you. The moon can help you to decide when to turn inwards and be reflective, when to tap into your intentions, when to take action, when to be creative and explore your self expression, when to cleanse your energy. So if you consider a lunar cycle is about 28 to 29 days, which I find to be quite interesting that it's the same amount of time as a woman's menstrual cycle. There's definitely some cosmic synergy there. At the beginning of the cycle, it's the new moon, and it's a really beautiful time to set your intentions and just to start with a blank page for the lunar month ahead. And you'll know it's a new moon if you go outside and you can't see the moon at all. It's completely dark in the sky. And then as it travels through the sky and it moves towards the full moon, that part of the lunar cycle is a really great time for nurturing yourself, for determining what you want to focus on for the month ahead, for rooting into plans and making refinement where you need to. Then we hit the full moon. It's halfway through the lunar cycle. It's a really beautiful time to tune into your manifestation practice. So if you take that one time a month to really dial into your manifestation strategy and think about what it is that you want on that list that we talked about before, that's the time to do it. Use the full moon, it's a great time for that. And then we move through the waning phase of the moon, and that's all about releasing energy, letting go of things that aren't working, letting the stagnancy leave you, really thinking about how you can prepare for the new moon again that's coming at the top of the cycle and start all over again. And when you work with that sort of cycle, every month you'll find there are these variety of energies that support you, especially for folks that are listening that are entrepreneurs or creatives. If you tap into those energies, you'll feel like you're just really in flow throughout the month.
Okay. I had absolutely no clue. I'm going to have to look into that a little bit more so
Yeah.
that, yeah, that sounds so interesting.
Yeah, and what you can do is just download a moon app on your phone. Like there's lots of good ones. But just get a moon app on your phone and then you can kind of check in and see, okay, what phase are we in today? Okay, got it. This is the new moon. And you'll also see if you have one of these apps like, oh, it's the new moon in Libra. Okay, what is Libra about? Libra's about balance and beauty. All right, so this would be a really good time to maybe refresh my closet and set a new intention for how I want to get dressed and how I want to show up this month ahead. So you can start to play with it that way too, and it becomes quite fun.
That's really interesting how you mix like the new moon with like the astrology aspects
Yeah.
and whatnot. There's a lot to learn. Like I've been learning more about like human design and like all those types of
Oh,
things,
yeah.
and there's just so much that's like not talked about enough. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like
Yeah.
I think we need to take more time to dive into that so that we can really get into alignment with, you know, who we want to be.
Yeah, it's so true. And the word that you just used, alignment, is what's so important. This isn't about being superstitious. It's not about like, oh, I'm not going to do this because it's not what's written in my chart right now, or it's not what the lunar phase says. It's really just about like, let human design, let the lunar energies, let your astrology serve as a guide for you to feel more energetically aligned. And you're always going to feel like you're making the best decisions for yourself. You're moving in the right along the right path when you are energetically aligned. So just let them serve as really great tools and as guides for you.
Yeah. Now you've mentioned mystical magic. I kind of want to understand a little bit what that is, what you mean by that, and then how can we use it daily to help bring out our innate gifts?
Oh, we could talk about mystical magic for a whole episode. There's so many things I could say about this, but it's really just about tapping into energies outside of self. There is, I think most of us have at least some sort of belief system that says that there are energies that we do not quite understand how they work. And whether that's the energies within nature, how trees and flowers communicate with one another, whether that is cosmic energies like the things we just talked about, like astrology, or the lunations that are moving through the sky all the time, whether it's that, whether it's a connection or relationship to a spirit guide or ancestors or the angelic realms. You could look at the mystical magic that we have the opportunity to explore in so many ways. And what I think is important is see what resonates for you. If you're interested, explore, read about things. My podcast, it's the reason it's called Your Woo Woo Best Friend is I from the beginning wanted to just introduce people to different ways of thinking, different modalities, different types of mystical magic, and give the listeners an opportunity to see what might work for them, see what they might want to connect to, and what might be helpful for them. So, mystical magic is everywhere. It's in all of us, it's in everything. We're all connected. We're all connected, and that's really what it's about.
Okay. Now, can you share three good habits that can lead to our optimal health, whether that's physical, emotional, spiritual, and whatnot, that we should be including in our daily rituals?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the basics are there's so many things that you can do to optimize your health, and health can mean so many things, right? It's like our physical health, it's our emotional health, it's our mental health, it's our spiritual health. And which ones do I want to give you? I feel like there's such good stuff you could do. I think it's like really consider what you're putting into your body every day. I'm not personally one to recommend like specific diets, but it's like stay hydrated. Just stay hydrated. Put good green foods into your body. I'm totally an advocate of intuitive eating, and that's a ritual that I think is something in its own right, just following the flow of your body and connecting into what foods are the most nourishing for you. When it comes to emotional wellness and well-being, remembering that I feel like this is really important right now. Your feelings are valid. However you are responding to the world around you, because the world around us is challenging, whatever that is for you that's showing up emotionally, it's valid. So a good practice is to consider how you're treating yourself. Consider how you're taking care of the emotions that arise for you. Practicing becoming a master of emotions is a really important thing for our well-being, for our health. So I think those two things are really important. Getting outside in nature as frequently as you can and connecting to your breath. Another really simple but profound practice, being in nature and learning to regulate breath. So, those are the three rituals that I would recommend that you incorporate: eating well and staying hydrated, validating your emotions and learning to become a master of how you feel and how you express, and then getting outside and practicing some good breathing while you're doing it.
That's funny. Like the emotional aspect and regulating the emotions and being aware and whatnot, that's definitely something that this year has brought to surface, just with the whole levels of stress and
Yeah.
everything that I think 2 years of COVID has compounded. I feel like
Yeah.
it's kind of exploded this year a little bit for a lot of people I know as well. And just being way more aware of the emotions and how you're reacting and just managing them so much better is just so important as just a regular human being in life, but also as an entrepreneur and a leader within your team or your industry. It's absolutely key.
It
And
is.
then the whole breathing thing, I think like this is the funniest thing in the world to me. How important breathing is and how often we forget to like
Yeah.
actually take full breaths.
Yeah, I mean, when you measure, when scientists do studies on people moving through their day and how they're breathing, humans are we breathe, we're shallow breathers. It's so not good for us. We move through the day taking these really shallow breaths, holding our breath, and it's a simple shift to become conscious of your breath a couple of times a day. It's a small thing and it makes such an impact.
It has such a crazy impact of being able to release a lot of stuff that's being like stuck within
Mhm.
you. Yeah, such a simple thing and such like a common sense thing, but it's not. Now, I'd love to know what your practice looked like.
My practices change really by the season, and it's not like on, the fall equinox I made a decision to change my practices, but I kind of just follow the flow. I do some meditation sometimes. It's a little more lengthy than others. I love kundalini meditation and mantras, so which can sound kind of weird, but it's like I listen to mantra music. And then as I begin to learn the mantras, I'll do some singing or chanting. And trust me, I'm not a good singer, but there's something really special about using your voice in that way and practicing working with bringing inner energy to life through sound. So I love those types of practices, meditation and mantra practices. I start my day with a glass of warm water with a lemon just to get a really good balance um, system going to start the day. I definitely focus on eating really clean. My partner and I go out and hike a couple nights out of the week. We'll typically go out right before sunset and get about a 30-minute hike in. I love my Pilates sessions. I used to do a ton of yoga, and all the yoga studios obviously closed during COVID. And when studios were starting to open back up, I actually found that I wanted to be in the Pilates studio versus the yoga studio. So I do a lot of that now, and I really love that. I have a couple of quick things I do in the morning. I have I always have a morning affirmation, and that can change sometimes too. And they're always like short, sweet, and simple. One I use a lot is I am bountiful, I am blissful, I am beautiful. And so I'll say that in my head for a couple of minutes in the morning. And when I get to the bathroom and I'm looking in the mirror and getting things going, and we're not always feeling first thing in the morning bountiful and blissful and beautiful, but when you repeat that to yourself in the mirror and really let that settle into how you're going to start your day, I find that to be a really nice practice. I work through a couple of things like I use a dry brush on my skin in the morning, not necessarily every day, but as many days of the week as I can fit it in. Do some oil, work with some oil on my skin. So I do practices like that, but I am constantly rotating new things then that I want to try, and just seeing what really feels like a good flow for me.
That sounds like a beautiful practice. I love that. Now, what do you have available to support your community? So how can people work with you?
Yeah, we have all sorts of good things going on in Wee Wee Studio. So Wee Wee Studio is our home for personal well-being and radiance. We've got lots of courses and workshops. We host retreats as well. So we have our Bali retreat coming up next spring, which is our next big one, and it's a 7-day adventure with other like-minded individuals in Bali. We have lots of freebies too. We have an 8-step manifestation guide. I mentioned the 8 steps before. We offer that as a freebie. We have a manifestation masterclass. We do a reset with our community several times a year in which we focus on the physical, the mental, the emotional, and the spiritual well-being of our community, and support the folks that join us for that, and really helping to identify where they've got blocks and where they're holding themselves back in each of those categories and create a new path and a new plan. So you can find all that stuff over on Wee Wee Studio, and then the blog is Wee Wee Girl, and we've got lots of good stuff there too.
Perfect. Now, where do you hang out the most? Where can people connect with you online?
So you can definitely find me on Instagram. It's Wee Wee Girl, although I'm thinking I may change the name when I get married to my name and actually be myself. So right now it's Wee Wee Girl. Depending on when you're listening, it may be Andi Eaton. And you can definitely send me a DM if you want to chat more about this stuff. I love having conversations with folks interested in these sorts of conversations. And then definitely check out the podcast too. And we have a podcast Instagram page, and we love chatting with our listeners and the DMs over there too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Annie, for taking the time to join us and for sharing your expertise and your experience with us. It's such an important topic that I think has so many benefits that we need to spend more time learning about. So thank you for educating us a bit more about it.
Thank you for having me, Jessica. It's been such a pleasure.
I'm Jessica, and thanks for tuning in today to Love Unplugged, the podcast. If there are any questions or topics you'd love answered on the show, head on over to www.projectloveco.com and share your request with me. If you haven't yet, go to iTunes and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast and share it with a loved one. Your feedback means the world to me, and the community we've created is what fuels our discussions here. After all, this is all for you. Join me next time for another unplugged conversation.